Do you struggle to price your illustration work? Yeah, I thought so. Today we're going to dive into that and take a closer look at some of the common problems that we face when pricing our illustration work. And I've got 5 tips that will hopefully make things a little bit easier for you. I'm James, an illustration agent in the UK and author of The Illustrator's Guide, which has a whole chapter on pricing. I speak to a lot of new illustrators, and the most common questions I get are about prices. It's kind of a mystery how some illustrators come up with their prices, right? I want to read you a short quote here from Ogilvy on advertising. "It is usually assumed that marketers use scientific methods to determine the price of their products. Nothing could be further from the truth. In almost every case, the process of decision is one of guesswork." That's David Ogilvy's book, published in 1983 or 4, I think. David Ogilvy, in case you haven't heard of him, is the founder of Ogilvy and Mather, which is one of the big-time advertising agencies in the world, founded in the 1940s, proper Mad Men era. He was talking about how companies price their products, and since that book was written, I would say that pricing has become more of a science or collection of sciences that inform how big companies price their products. But you know what? If you're an illustrator just starting out, there is a lot of guesswork involved in pricing your work. At the start, you get all the advice you can from books, blogs, or videos, but ultimately, you have to make a guess that the price you're giving is about right for what the client wants to pay. As time goes on, your guesses get more accurate because you've worked with a bunch of different kinds of clients on loads of different kinds of projects, so you get a feel for which kinds of clients pay what. You've built up your own mental pricing guide. I'm afraid there's no quick solution in this video, apart from maybe tip number 1. Experience is really the only way to get more confident in pricing your work. That means you will make some mistakes along the way. You may give too high a price for some clients and scare them off, but far more often, out of fear of scaring them off, you'll give a price that's too low and leave money on the table. Because I've been an agent for a long time now, I've priced up a hell of a lot of projects with different kinds of clients and different illustrators and different styles. That's a large part of my job. Agents get to see the same quantity of illustration projects in a month as an illustrator might see in a year, so we get to know what acceptable prices are much quicker. My guesses of what different kinds of clients' budgets are pretty good at this point, but still not perfect because every client and every project is different. To avoid guessing completely, here's the first tip. Ask what the budget is. It's impossible to know what a client's budget is for a project unless you ask them what it is. Even with clients that look the same, sell similar products in the same places to the same kinds of consumers, they can still want to spend radically different amounts on a project. So if you don't want to guess, ask the question. You can say, "What do you want to spend on this project?" You can ask, "Can you tell me your budget?" This is tip number 1 for a reason. You should always ask. They might not always tell you, but if they do, then your life just got a hell of a lot easier. And it's not rude to ask. It's just the same as asking about the schedule or what file types they need delivering. It's a question you ask to know if you're a good fit for the project. If they tell you, that's great. You can accept or negotiate. If they don't tell you, then you've got to figure out how to come up with a price. Tip 2, pricing guides. Really, the goal is to give the client a price that's in the right ballpark. It's not so low that you represent yourself as a beginner or somebody who doesn't know the value of their own work, and it's not so high that the client is scared off. You can give a price that's a little bit lower than what they want to spend, or you can give one that's a little bit higher than their budget and still win the job. They have an amount that they want to spend and a price they are willing to spend if you're a good fit for the project, so there are acceptable boundaries. But if you go too low, you may represent yourself as being low quality, and if you go too high, the conversation ends because it's too far out of their budget. This is where a guide like this comes in handy. The Graphic Artists Guild publishes this pricing guide every year, I think, and it's very useful to get a rough idea of acceptable prices in different industries, such as advertising, editorial, music, publishing. It's impossible for a guide like this to give you the exact right price for your work and your style. It's put together using sample data, so it can only ever be a general guide. It doesn't factor in your experience level or how labor-intensive your style is, or any of your other personal circumstances that influence how much you need to charge. It also doesn't factor in what your client wants to spend on the specific project they've sent to you. If you have very little personal experience to draw on, this kind of guide is a great starting point to make sure the price you give is in the right ballpark. You can see what an average fee for a magazine cover is, for example, for a monthly magazine in the US, and then you can adjust from there based on your personal circumstances. Tip 3, ask for advice. Another way to get a rough idea of where you should be aiming your prices is to ask for advice from someone who's got more experience than you do. Now that's fairly straightforward if you have a network of creative people around you. less so if you don't. But let's say you're asked to quote for a project for the New York Times, as an example. You've asked their budget, and they won't tell you. So you could Google New York Times illustration and do an image search, and you'll find a bunch of illustrators who've worked for them. Look up their contact details and send them a short, polite email. All those illustrators have been through this awkward phase of not knowing what to charge, so I'm sure some of them would help you and be kind enough to give you a quick opinion. Keep in mind, based on how long they've been doing the job and how complex their style is, they may be able to charge a higher price than a newcomer to the industry. The quote they give isn't necessarily the quote you should give, but it does give you another data point to work from. If they've been doing the job for 10 years and they say $3,000, you'll probably want to make some adjustments to that. Consciously undercutting other illustrators' prices is obviously a very bad practice that undermines the value of creative work, but you should charge appropriately for your skill level and experience. Someone with no experience can't charge the same as an artist that's been doing the job for 10 years. That's just not the way it works in any industry. A creative with a lot of experience and skill is more valuable to a client, so they're willing to pay more for that value. If a beginner gives the same price as an experienced professional, the client won't hire them because they can hire that professional for the same price. If you can get some rough data points from a guide like this or from another illustrator, you'll know roughly what the goalposts are and you can give a quote that's somewhere in the middle there. Tip 4, don't worry about it. We tend to put a lot of pressure on ourselves to price things perfectly and build it up in our heads into being this massive problem that we have to try and figure out as quickly as possible. And I get it, you want to be paid fairly, but every illustrator goes through this, and I guess it's a bit of a rite of passage. No one can tell you what you should charge for your work. It's probably one of the only things you really have to figure out for yourself, and that simply takes a bit of time and some experimenting. Talking about money isn't easy if you're not used to it. From your point of view, it's your career, it's how you make money, or you want it to be a viable source of income, and you're excited to get to that stage. If you have limited previous experience and no benchmarks to base your prices on, you're bound to feel a bit lost and not very confident. You don't want the client to think you have no idea what you're doing. It's an emotional subject for you, tangled up with all these other things that you're thinking about. Well, it's not emotional for your client. It's just a run-of-the-mill, regular business decision. They have a budget to spend on illustration, and you're either a good fit or you're not. The art director you're working with isn't spending their own money. Their boss tells them what they can spend, and they find the best illustrator they can with the money they've got. It's not personal or emotional. When I was doing some stand-up gigs in London, I got incredibly nervous when going on stage for lots of reasons, thinking about all kinds of worst-case scenarios, worrying about how I looked, how I spoke, how I was holding my hands, or if other people would judge me on the sweat patches under my arms. But the truth is, from the audience's point of view, they did not know or care who I was or what I looked like. They wanted to have a laugh, and I was either funny or I wasn't. I was either good value for money or I wasn't. Once I walked off the stage, most of them would have never thought about me ever again. Emotionally draining and stressful for me, but definitely not for them. Spending a lot of time worrying about pricing your work at the beginning of your career is a waste of energy. Most of your clients will tell you what they have to spend, and for the ones that don't, the amounts of money you're likely to be earning as a beginner are relatively small. You can afford to make a few mistakes, or rather, have a few learning experiences. You do need to know how to price your work when you get into the higher paying jobs and bigger clients, but that's not likely to happen for a while. You've got plenty of time to learn as you go. Concentrate on making a living and leveling up your illustration skills first so you can offer more value to your clients and refine your personal pricing guide as you go along. Tip 5, look forward to negotiating. What might seem even more stressful than giving a price is then having to negotiate that price. But think about it like this. If the client accepts your price with no negotiation, you've either given the exact right price, which is fine, or you've possibly left some money on the table. You can learn from that and try and go a little higher next time, but you still won the job, so even if it's a little on the low side, you're still winning. If you give a price and the client starts to negotiate with you, that's a great sign. That's exactly the position you want to be in, because it means they're seriously interested in working with you. You now know that you're priced within the right ballpark, so you can be confident in the next few emails or phone calls that they do want to work with you, and you just have to make some small adjustments to win the project. If your price is a little bit too high for a client, they'll negotiate. If it's a little bit too low, sure, you're leaving some money on the table, but you're still in the right ballpark to represent yourself as a professional. The better you get at your creative skills and the more experience you have, the better your prices can be. And for the most part, negotiating for an illustrator is simply sending an email. You're not sat around a boardroom table full of lawyers like in the movies. It's just an email. It's just a question. They can say no, and you can say no too, but they can also say yes. So that's something to look forward to. Learning how to price your own work is tough and a major concern for a lot of creatives. But don't worry about it. Take your time. You'll make some mistakes, but those mistakes are how you'll learn. The more practice you get, the more confident you'll feel about it. See you next time.